I'm John Shrek McPhee, the Sheriff of Baghdad. This is the SOB podcast. We'll pick up right where we left off on part 2 of the legal brief.
Yeah, what do you do? What do you do if confronted with damage to your business? Like, okay, you own a store, you're in a town or city, it doesn't matter, right? How do you defend that from being damaged?
Yeah, that's a real tough one. I mean, but from what I've observed and what I've seen, people have done that. And again, I think that, to some degree, the Kyle Rittenhouse case is a good illustration of it. I mean, he put himself, I believe, somewhere as a deterrent. And if you're lawfully there, with, and your life is in danger, then I think that, you can, check the box for the, the key self-defense, requirements, imminence, reasonableness, and proportionality. But if it's just to protect, private property, this is, based upon my understanding, I don't see the same level of protection that you're going to be justified. Again, the only caveat I'll say is if the state has, let's say, arson is considered a violent crime that, you can use deadly force to prevent, but I don't, again, that property is straying. Again, I go back to, it's just not afforded the same level of protection as a person. But again, if you're lawfully present, like Kyle Rittenhouse, it was an open carry, although he, had some issue because he wasn't old enough. But if you've got a, lawful, weapon and you're lawfully present to protect the business and you're protecting that business as a deterrent and your life is in jeopardy because you're being attacked, well, then I would think that you can justify, using lethal self-defense in that instance. But I don't think you can expand upon that just to defend property. Again, different story if it's you're working in a business and there's other people in the building, perhaps. Different story if it's your home. But, I just don't think the law gives the same level of protection to, property.
Yeah, I think if I owned a business, what I would do, hypothetically, right, allegedly, whatever, is I would sit inside my business and I would give you so many feet inside the door, let's say 10 feet through the door, and then I'd drop you. And I would hope 1 million people ran through because then I could get 1 million kills. And then it's just me, you know what I mean? But I promised myself I wouldn't, when I retired, I promised myself I wouldn't kill anyone else. I can't tell you how hard that is for me sometimes because I'm like, you know what I mean? Like, if I can't keep a promise to myself, I'm going to keep it to. But what do you think about if someone runs and gets so far in your business and you're sitting there? You think that's legit defense?
I think it's going to boil down to whether or not you're justified in protecting yourself or anyone else who was lawfully present in the business. That's what I think.
Right. Right.
I think you can make a good case if there, especially if there are weapons involved. But once I see that as a pretty bright line in terms of person versus property. And again, the important exception may be being your home, where you've got a more heightened ability to defend. But
I would do the same move in my house.
Yeah. I think you'd be much more justified in your home. But again, here's where a little bit of knowledge helps, because some states are probably going to give you more protection in that scenario, John. Other states won't. So, this is where it might help to do a little bit of homework before you decide, you're going to, protect your business from looters. And just dig in a little bit. Ask an attorney friend if you don't know where to find the criminal or penal code.
Right.
Ask around. Try and rely on reliable sources. Obviously, don't take someone's word for it if you don't have a high degree that they know what they're talking about it and you can verify it. But that's where it pays to do a little bit of homework. But I think that putting yourself in a situation where you could, have to use deadly force is it's dangerous for the obvious reason. It's also dangerous legally because you're, again, you're dealing with a culture, like you said before, where more often than not, you're going to be overcharged. And I see it, it's the exception, not the rule, that somebody is, the charges are appropriate. More often than not, you're overcharged and you've got very serious issues to deal with. But
yeah. So you think my let them come in the business and drop them so many feet away from the door to protect your, I'm doing quotes here, not air quotes, I'm doing real quotes with my hand, real quotes, to protect yourself, turning this into a person-on-person situation, you would be better off?
I would say yes. At first, I was going to plead the fifth until you...
I plead the fifth, but I did real quotes. You can't argue with that, right?
But you elaborated on the question, so I felt comfortable giving general.
All right, so kind of same situation. What about your car?
Well, I think it all depends, but I think it's very similar. If you're confronted with lethal force and that you need to defend yourself, I think the fact that you're in your car is probably not much different than if you were lawfully in your business.
Right.
I mean, take an active shooter, scenario. Not moving away from protesters. But again, I think that every state is going to deal with it a little bit different. Some states are going to be more protective, and maybe even treat your car closer to, the kind of protection that you have in your home. And other states are going to be on the opposite end of the spectrum, and where maybe you wouldn't have that in any enhanced protection, but obviously to save your life, save the life of a loved one or someone else, who happens to be in the car with you, you would be justified. But I don't think that there's any other special, consideration that I've been able to ascertain. That's why I think these same key core self-defense concepts, would probably apply. Again, reasonableness, proportionality, imminence, and not being the aggressor. I mean, if it was, a road rage incident that escalated and you wound up shooting someone, I think that would be a unhelpful fact at trial. But if you were, waiting for, your wife to bring out the groceries and someone stuck a gun in your face, I think that, you'd have an easier time establishing justifiable self-defense.
So let me ask you this. I know with a lot of legal stuff, there's precedent, right? So, I don't know, a few months ago, a guy tried to get into the White House and the Secret Service shot him in the driveway. Remember that? You hear about that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Let's say I shoot someone in my driveway. Could I use that as precedent?
I don't think so.
Why is the White House more important than my house?
Well, I think that there's I think that there's a different context matters. I often say it's in one sense they're both houses, right? I mean, but I think that the White House, just as, let's say, an important federal building or military base has a different level of, protection. And the other issue at play is, I think that, the most, either probably a host of other laws that would prohibit anyone from trespassing on those that are even more, stringent than trespassing at your house. I would say it's probably more dangerous if they trespass at your house than the White House, but that's my personal opinion. But I think that it's not, it's interesting, but I don't know that would be the analogy or the legal precedent, because you would be able to draw, there's plenty of precedent about protecting your home. And, the White House is such a unique, structure, the fact that, the Secret Service has, well-established, the precedent for protecting the president from harm, that I think that, they would have a much easier time exercising, self-defense than you, John, I suspect. But it's, not completely, unrelated, but I don't think it would be, I don't think that would carry the day. But,
so you don't think it would help?
Interesting.
And you don't?
Not really. I don't think that would, not substantially, not even a little.
Not even a little? What if I named one of my children the president and I painted my house white?
Yeah.
No? Not even that?
I don't see it.
Okay.
But I think you would be in good shape regardless. So I don't think that, as I say, I don't think that would be outcome determinative.
I live in North Carolina. I'd be fine.
Exactly.
I think in North Carolina, and I don't know this for a fact, but I believe in North Carolina, I could actually shoot through my front door and be justified. Even though I wouldn't, but I hear that is kind of the one of the things of North Carolina, like castle doctrine precedent.
Yeah, well, that goes to what I said about how some states are going to give a much broader protection,
right,
than other states. Because I can tell you, I don't know North Carolina, but I know where I live, that would not be a wise thing for me to do.
Even if you had a child named the president and painted your house white.
You're giving me a whole range of ideas that I didn't consider before, but I don't think that would change the outcome.
Okay, so look, we've talked about the whole time. We've run through what I would consider ridiculous kind of scenarios for 2015. Not so ridiculous in 2020 scenarios. So, okay, let's say something happens, right? How do you set yourself up for success, right? What is kind of the steps involved, right? The incident happens. Do you turn yourself in immediately? Do you wait till the next morning? What kind of happens here? What if they, how do you set yourself up for success?
Boy, again, not being a criminal defense attorney per se, my advice, what I would do for myself or my friends, I would, number one, resist the temptation to make any statements in the aftermath to law enforcement. And I will tell you, that might have that might piss some people off, but, I would be polite. I would be cooperative. But I would not make any statements. And I would say that, I wanted my lawyer and I will be happy to cooperate after speaking to my attorney, and leave it at that. I think that it's hard to draw the line between saying I was in fear of my life, I acted in self-defense, and then shutting up. Because I think once you open the door and start talking, it's hard to stop, because a question will come up. That's just my instinct in dealing with people. So, I mean, is it going to hurt you if you said those things? I acted in self-defense. I was in fear of my life. I don't think so. I think that's completely consistent. But my fear, if it's myself or if I was advising a friend or a loved one, I would be afraid that they wouldn't have the discipline to stop after that. And then details would, and again, if it's helpful, fine. But, what I think about is, you could give a statement. I mean, I've never had a situation, but I would have, I talked to a police officer who used deadly force, and he said he was, not in a good frame of mind to give a statement in the aftermath. And again, this is just anecdotal, but it's not hard to imagine that you might leave an important fact out. You might not even, you might forget to mention the other person had a weapon.
Right.
I could easily see it happening. And then fast forward, you're arrested, you're taken away from the scene, and, at the station, you say, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, I saw a weapon, which was not on him. It was, maybe they found it. And so I could see that right then and there, they've got your statement right at the scene. You didn't mention anything about a weapon. So it looks like you're adding it. That's where it's just not helpful to give an early statement that's going to lock you in, where you're either going to have to backpedal, explain why you didn't say something, why you left something out. It's much better to make that be gain distance, as you said, have that be a careful process. As far as turning yourself in, that when you're considering things like that, I would say that's where I would get an attorney involved. Obviously, I'm thinking of the situation where the police are there, talking to people who I trust, who tell me what they would recommend, and law enforcement people. I would not have a weapon on my person at that time. I would figure out a way, me personally, not to be holding anything on myself, because I would not want, law enforcement to arrive and me be holding a weapon. That's just what, several law enforcement personnel have told me. It's
a great way to get shot. I'll throw it out there.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this is, it's, obviously only if it's safe, at that scenario, but, I would, pose that same question to, law enforcement officer. Obviously, if there's time and there's, turning yourself in, I would venture to say you'd want to get an attorney involved at the earliest possible time to coordinate that. But the situation I'm thinking of is, the police are called or they're there, and, you're going to be presumably arrested if someone is badly injured.
On the spot, right? You're going with the cop.
So that's not the time to tell your story. I would say the most important thing you can do is resist the temptation to speak and be disciplined enough to, be cooperative. But the time to make a statement is after you've spoken to an attorney, when they could really act as a buffer and flush everything out. I think that's probably the most important thing. Don't consent to anything. Don't consent to any searches. Don't give up your rights. Be as cooperative as possible. You're not going to get anywhere arguing with anyone. But hold your ground in terms of, resist that temptation to make a statement. And that's just because that could really hurt you. And then you'll be living with that for the life of the case. And, that's why, it's tempting to say, hey, say this or that and stop. But just knowing human nature, I think that's hard to ask people to do. And hey, if someone pulls that off and says something that's, rings true and is perfect, then you'll be in good shape. But that's hard to do, I think, in the aftermath of a deadly encounter. So, I mean, if I were giving, I think the better advice is not to make any statements and invoke your right to counsel and say, I want my lawyer. Don't mess that up. like so many people, often do. I want my lawyer. In fact, that's verbatim what a prosecutor told me is the clearest, most unequivocal way to invoke your right to counsel.
Right. And it doesn't mean you're guilty. You're not, it just means you're not saying anything until your lawyer comes. And so
exactly. That's what most people don't get. And I will tell you that is people have a hard time, shaking that mistaken belief that they say, oh, if I don't say anything, they're going to think I'm guilty. Well, number one, that's not true. Number two, in my opinion, you're going to look like, if you say, I'm happy to cooperate, but I want my lawyer, we need to take a statement. I'm not going to make a statement. I want my lawyer. I'll be happy to cooperate after I speak to my lawyer. To me, I mean, what can they, I don't think, well, and you're talking to an attorney, that doesn't denote guilt at all. And it's so much better than making a statement that, and you don't know who these officers are. I mean, they might be, their role, and they don't know you. They don't know what happened. Right. They might have a completely, they might talk to somebody who had a different vantage point, and they might be operating on a mistaken belief. Again, I say protect yourself. Don't make a statement that, can be misconstrued or used against you, or, and create additional hurdles for yourself. It's perfectly fine, even if it's unpleasant and you don't make anyone happy at the scene. Your attorney will be thrilled, I guarantee, when they meet you, because the first question they're going to ask is, what did you tell the police? Probably. I would suspect.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Same question, right? Vehicle stuff. You're stopped on the highway. Does a cop have the right to search your car? And at what point does that come in? Right. And then I'll ask you some more vehicle questions after.
Okay. So here's my view on this. The Fourth Amendment protects everyone from unreasonable searches and seizures. And, my understanding is there needs to be probable cause, right? Everyone has heard that term, I'm sure. So, can a police search your vehicle? I would say generally no is my understanding, but there are exceptions. There are exceptions. The most important thing that I would say, and what I think about, is I just simply would never consent to the search of a vehicle. Because look, policeman pulls you over. I mean, if there's blood all over the inside of the car, I would venture to say the policeman is going to say there's probable cause to search the vehicle. If you've got, wads of cash all over the car, anything within plain sight, I mean, that's where I'm sure there are exceptions that would permit, but that's for them to do. If anyone asks me, hey, I would like, do you consent to the search of your vehicle? My answer is going to be no. Again, it could agitate an officer. It could be unpleasant. I would be as polite as I possibly could. I would say something, I guess, I don't think there's any basis to. I'm not trying to argue with you, but I'm not giving you my consent. Look, to me, what happens next? If they search the car and it wasn't justified, it gets thrown out. The evidence is my understanding. So what I would say, the way I look at it, I just would never voluntarily consent to a search, because once you do that, you've given up that right that you have under the Constitution. You've consented to the search of your vehicle. You can't really complain about it later. So to me, I look at it very simply. I mean, to me, I think that's the takeaway that I have. Again, I have nothing to hide. People might feel like, oh, do I look guilty? No. I mean, but why in the world? There's no basis to. I mean, I don't think there's a reason. I don't think it's appropriate that you search my car. I'm not consenting to the search. So that's how I would deal with that situation for my own. And I think that, probably how I would advise my family and friends.
Okay. What about you get stopped on the highway in a protest and you crash through, but no one's harmed? What do you think you should? How do you set yourself up for success? Because the next question is going to be: is you ran some fools over? But let's just say no one gets harmed. You end up crashing through, and then later the cops catch up with you.
Yeah, this the vehicle stuff gets a little bit tricky because because you could inadvertently, and again, forgive me, I don't know. The elements of a hit and run, or a vehicular, type of, injury. But, I would say that gets to be, pretty tricky because, obviously if you're trying to escape and you're being surrounded and you're really fleeing, I can put myself in that position, and it's happened before. Obviously it might be more prevalent now. And look, if no one gets injured and you're able to escape, to me, then great. But if someone's injured, that becomes, I think, a bit more problematic. I think if it were myself, I would probably, look to report that, so that I wouldn't be accused of fleeing from the scene, which could itself be another, charge. Or I would get to a point where I felt safe and assess the situation, at that time. If I knew an attorney, I would probably, call them, or I would report it, just as I would report, a vehicle accident, I suppose. But this is not an area where I've really spent any time studying or doing a deep dive in. That's just my, 2 cents. But it's certainly, something that could occur nowadays. When roads are blocked or there's a mass protest and you take the wrong turn, you're in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
any of these are very real situations. So whatever happens, you end up with law enforcement. You end up saying, I'd be happy to give a statement, but I need to talk to my attorney.
Absolutely. To me, I always polite, because again, I don't think even if no one else is being polite, right, I think that it doesn't get you anywhere, arguing, with law enforcement. So I would be as calm and polite as possible. And I would simply say, I'm happy to cooperate, but I want my lawyer. And, after I speak to my attorney, I'll be happy to cooperate. Something to that effect. Because I just, again, even there, I wouldn't be, don't think it would be prudent to release any statements at that time. You can always get the statement out. They're going to collect statements from whatever witnesses. They're going to do that. But I think especially if someone's injured or worse, I think you're in a dangerous situation that, you're going to want the benefit of legal advice. And you're going to want to be careful about what you say and get everything out that could help. Again, for my own benefit, my fear would be, as an attorney, I don't know that I would, make the best statement 10 minutes after I got into an accident trying to flee from a protest. I would venture to say that wouldn't be my best statement. I would guarantee that wouldn't be my best statement. So why wouldn't I? Because it's voluntary. I wouldn't have to. Even if I was arrested, you don't have to make the statement. Better to make the statement that you're going to hang your hat on with some careful discussion with an attorney. That's your right.
And that's even if you ran over a dozen protesters.
You're killing me with these fact patterns. Yeah, I would say the same. Look, it's, I think if someone's injured and you are on the wrong side of a potential, charge and you're being arrested, I think the best advice that I would get would be, invoke your right to counsel, say, I want my lawyer, and then, be polite and make the statement after you've gotten your attorney involved, who can act as a buffer, who can, get information about what happened, who can put out the absolute best, help you put out the best statement, to protect your interests. Because, if you try and help yourself, you may, and then you may not. I would tend to think the odds are you might do more harm than good. But people, again, you have to, I think, as an attorney, you have to resist that instinct.
Right.
Because that's just the beginning. If
right.
you told the officer how great you were, how you didn't mean to do this, that's not going to save you from being arrested, probably.
No.
And that's not going to save you from being charged. So you're not going to win your case in that first, encounter. But you could hurt yourself badly. And
right.
you living with that bad statement that they're going to, and it might even be inadvertent. It might be incomplete. It might make you look worse than, so I look at it, I can do a lot of damage. I'm not going to, prevent anything, really, at the scene. So why not wait and, get the benefit of an attorney, who's, done this, dozens, if not hundreds of times and knows, and will be able to grasp very quickly that, hey, this was a justifiable self-defense. Here are the things that he'll want to bring out and emphasize in your statement. So it's all about, putting your best foot forward.
Right. Okay. This whole time, the statement is, I want to talk to my attorney. What if you don't have one?
It doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
I want my lawyer. That is verbatim what a prosecutor told me is the simplest way to invoke counsel. I want my lawyer. And again, so you make the call to your spouse, to your friend, to whomever, if
right.
As soon as you can. And you say, I need an attorney. Here's what happened. Find me the best attorney, or call someone that you know. I would say it doesn't matter that you don't have an attorney, that you know their cell phone number. You can get one.
Right.
But it's key that, that they won't, the interrogation and should stop once you invoke your right to counsel. But if you equivocate, if you're not clear, I don't think the interrogation has to stop. And that's why my,
want my attorney.
Yep, that's my understanding.
All right. Let me ask you one more question. Right? Is what about we've talked about the whole kind of gamut, right? From funny to serious to good to bad, right? The CCW insurance. What do you think about that?
I'll tell you what, I've got kind of mixed feelings about CCW insurance, but I would say that it's for one thing, all insurance is not equal. So, if I wanted a policy that would cover, if I'm a concealed carry and I potentially put myself in harm's way, and I wanted an insurance policy that would pay my defense costs, maybe pay an amount of judgment costs. Yeah, I would want a couple of things. Number one, I would want to make sure that policy would allow me to select my own attorney, as opposed to some attorney that the insurance company would appoint to represent. In that latter case, I want no part of it. If I can select counsel among the approved, attorneys that they might have, or I would select my own counsel, which they would pay for, I would say that would be worth, if it was a reasonable policy, that would be one criteria that me personally, I would insist on. Because panel counsel for insurance companies tend to be very low paid. And think about this. I mean, they have no vested interest in the success of your case. I wouldn't suspect. But if I were charged with something, I'd want to make sure I got a great referral to a great attorney, who had a great track record of getting good results for people in similar situations. And if that CCW insurance wouldn't allow me to, get one of those attorneys, then I would say I would not think it would be very worthwhile, because would you really want to rely on someone, who's just underpaid, who's got, scores of these cases, who's just doing it on a, quantity basis, representing you if you used a weapon and killed someone? I would want the best attorney I could afford. So, is it worth it? It's probably better than nothing, but it might not be much better depending on the policy, is how I would look at it. That's how
I feel like, who's the guy? Hernandez, Trayvon Martin, what's his name? Hernandez. Some of the CCW insurance is like, we have Hernandez's lawyer on staff right now. The problem is like, well, we're not in Florida, and is Hernandez able to practice in my little county, right? So for me, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I want to be able to name my attorney, but there's only so many attorneys that are actually licensed in my county. So what happens then?
Right. Well, again, it depends on the policy. They might. I would try and find a policy that would allow me to select counsel, get them approved, and paid by the carrier. Another feature that I think is important to find out is whether or not whether the carrier pays these expenses directly or reimburses you, because I think that's a big difference. Obviously, you have to shell tens of thousands of dollars and then put in like an insurance claim and wait for. I mean, how many people can afford to do that? Let's say not many. So it's. I don't really know what the cost is. Again, I think if you are, concealed carry, a lot of people, I would say, a handful of my friends and colleagues carry it. But, my feeling is, it's probably better than nothing. But again, depending on the features of the policy, it might not be much better. So if I didn't have the right to choose my own counsel, if it didn't pay the expenses directly, then I don't think it's very worthwhile. So that's why, but that definitely is worth doing some homework about and, understanding what the coverage limitations are, what exactly the policy covers. I would never advise someone just go ahead and buy something without at least not the fine print, because if you ever read an insurance policy, it's written in a different language, but they'll have summary pages for what's covered and what's not covered. And that's what I would focus on. I would focus on what's covered, the cost, how much, what the limitations are in terms of the total amount. Is it $1 million of coverage? Is it $500,000? And then, can you, select counsel? And if it's reasonable and you're concerned about it, again, my feeling is probably better than nothing, but I think it's, they're not all created equal. That's my sense.
Yeah, I agree. I think those are those are two of the best answers I've heard about CCW insurance from anybody. Everyone's like, well, it varies. It's insurance, right? But the reality is like, I think both your points are super solid. Can I get my own counsel, and can I have them approved in my county before the court case, right? Otherwise, you're going to get the DA, right? Like the defense attorney, right? Because he's licensed in your county.
That's right.
And they could bring fucking Perry Mason, and like Perry Mason's got to work under the guy who's licensed here.
Correct.
You know what I mean? Now that could be good, could be bad. And then, hey, expenses. You guys paying up front? If you pay up front, like if I got to pay out of pocket and then you pay later, like I may not be able to afford this. So why did I pay ahead of time? So I think those are both solid questions, man. I think those are super solid questions, And I got to be honest with you. I have been approached by CCW insurance companies to rep them, advertise for them to my clientele, and the ones that have called me, I didn't decline, but I wasn't really doing anything about it, because if you do what I feel is true, gain distance, right? De-escalate, right? Stay calm enough for long enough to make a good decision, and then ask yourself the questions: is this a death sentence for this other person? Is someone's family or my family being harmed? If the boxes are checked and I shoot somebody, I'm probably going to do just fine in court. However, right, is what did you call them? Bad facts, right?
Yeah.
If you had a few unhelpful facts, if you had a few unhelpful facts, you might be fucked. You know what I mean? So, I always feel like if you were smart about it, and this was the last resort, and you did this as a thing of good, and you saved someone's life, you don't need CCW insurance. So it depends on how you're looking at it. And, I don't know, is getting CCW insurance an admission of guilt?
Yeah, no.
No.
I don't see how that comes in a bad way. Although, again, we live in a strange society. What might seem very prudent in North Carolina might not seem,
totally agree
elsewhere, but if you researched it and could afford it, and the coverage was good, and you made a decision to buy it, I think it's a stretch that would ever come back to bite you in a material way. So.
Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. I appreciate your time. Thanks for talking to me. And I think this was really good. And I think the takeaway here is I want to speak to my attorney and keep your mouth shut. I was in fear for my life. I was trying to save my children. My son's name is the president and I live in a White House. Don't say anything. I want to speak to my attorney. Go back to your cell, become someone's bitch, grab their pocket until a lawyer comes that someone you know might call, and then let him craft the statement. But I don't think that's so much different than a police officer involved shooting where they're like, go home, get a good night's sleep, come back tomorrow, review the camera footage, review all the evidence that we have for you that you probably took with your body, and then make your statement. I don't see how that's different at all, right? So, I think this was enlightening, especially for me. And I think, the next thing is people should really be looking into what their state is about. And look with the appointments of special prosecutors across the spectrum, your state could be not so friendly to a guy like you trying to defend your family, where my state, like, yeah, get out of here, kid. What are you doing, right? Like, so not all states are equal. Not all laws are equal. And I think, we're starting to see, like, especially through COVID, we're starting to see how much power governors have, you know what I mean? And how much power states have. Like, it's starting to become obvious. I think you should look into your state's laws, and then look, if stuff gets bad where you live, you could probably choose a state that has, look what Florida just did. It's a felony for you to be out on the highway. It's a felony to protest. It's a minimum of 6 months in jail. You protest in Florida, you do some Portland or Seattle-like shit in Florida, you're in jail for 6 months. You know how many protesters, like, if they rolled up 20, 30 protesters a night, a week of protest, there'd be no one to protest, right? So not all states are equal. Look at your state laws. And, if you live in an area that your state's not so friendly to people like you need to be very sure of your answers before you do anything. But I would say this is, I want to speak to my attorney is powerful stuff. Don't say shit. Don't try to, don't be a good person. Don't try to, even if you know the cop, don't say shit, right?
I would say that's how you best protect yourself.
So my last question to you is, we've talked about if you shoot a rioter, we've talked about a lot of stuff, right? Let's talk about the last piece, which is the 911 call, right? And I'll start with, something happens, you shoot somebody, you have to make the 911 call. What should you say? How should you proceed with that?
That is such an important question, because whether it's a shooting or some sort of altercation or motor vehicle accident, you may have to make that 911 call. And the first thing that you should be aware of is the same rules we discussed apply, in that I think almost everyone unanimously agrees no detailed statements, no different than if you are confronted by law enforcement. So that 911 call, based upon everything that I've read, should be very brief and only should contain a handful of things. First, I think most everyone would agree, you give your name, you give your address, some brief description of what happened, such as, there has been a shooting, and then please send police and please send an ambulance. And based upon everything else I've read, most of the folks who, opine about this say you should hang up afterward, because all these calls are recorded. And from what I understand, the 911 operators are trained to keep you talking keep you on the phone. And as I had mentioned earlier, it's not really in your interest to do a lot of talking after, a shooting, for all the reasons we discussed. You might leave an important detail out. You're going to be stuck with whatever statement you make. And those issues will matter because whether, it will be reviewed, it will be considered, and it may come up, at an ultimate trial on the issue, if it goes that far. So because you'll have to make it, I think those are, from what I've seen, those are, the key points that I think most of the experts that have weighed in on this issue recommend. Your name, your location, there's been a shooting, you're the victim of a crime, something to that effect, what services you need. Oh, one more thing, I think it is helpful, and I've seen it mentioned, what you're wearing to identify yourself. I'm in a black sweatshirt and jeans. I'll be waiting on the corner of such and such street for EMS or the police. Just so when it's dispatched, at least you have identified yourself as the caller for 911. Hopefully, naturally, the police are not going to know who the good guys are necessarily when they roll up, but at least I think that will alert them to, you were the caller, and presumably, they won't automatically assume that you're the a bad guy, so to speak, when they roll up.
Right. Right. I think it's smart. I think the first thing you said was super smart. There has been a shooting, right? Because if you shoot somebody, you're like, hey, I just shot somebody.
Right.
If that recording just went to court, like, we got you on tape saying you shot somebody, I think it's so important. There has been a shooting. Even if you ran over a protester and called yourself in, like, hey, someone was run over.
Right.
There was an accident, someone was run over.
Send an ambulance. Exactly. I can almost assure you that whatever statement that someone makes will be scrutinized. It'll be replayed. The tone of your voice will be over-examined, and depending upon what your perspective, it'll be so heavily scrutinized. Boy, that caller sounded cold, almost dispassionate. How could it, you be, it might not be consistent with a self-defense theory where your life was in danger, or be so erratic. How could you have, reasonably known that it was, it will be overanalyzed, and in my view, depending upon which side you're on, there might be details that are extracted to, reach one conclusion versus another. That's why I think you're better off, and based upon everything I've read, I think the smart advice is to be very brief, just the same way you would be with a law enforcement officer. No detailed statements, because you're going to be stuck with that. You could say something inadvertently, and again, it could be truthful but out of context. I just shot.
Right.
Not helpful to your cause if that's all you say, because someone, they don't have the full context.
What about this? What if you said there has been a shooting, and then how you said you asked for the ambulance? What if you said there's been a shooting, no need for an ambulance, just send the coroner? You think that's an admission of guilt?
This is not a moment for levity. That's what I would say. There's probably not the time to pull out, your smart ass. It's the time to keep that stuff in check. And I can relate to that because you might be, whatever you're thinking, if you're thinking that, don't say it. It would be my, I would keep that to yourself. Because again, going back to what we said, if you, don't make any detailed statements, you're safe, you survive. What you want is, your actions and whatever you say to fit within the self-defense theme. And what's the self-defense theme? You were in fear for your life. You thought you were going to be killed. You had no other choice in that moment but to defend yourself. If I were to, break down, hey, what's the theme for, using lethal force in self-defense, it would be those things. So your actions, your statements, if they're consistent with that theme, to me, you put yourself in a good position to argue self-defense. If you say, "Oh, I was scared for my life," or to me that's consistent. I think that's good. Nothing in the 911 call, saying there's been a shooting. To me, that's something that any responsible, prudent person would do. And in fact, I don't know if this is true or not, but I've seen certain articles which say there's a presumption if you make that 911 call that you're the quote innocent person because logically why would you ever call the police if you were a bad guy, right? I don't know how that comes into play, but it seems to make sense to me.
Yeah, no, that kind of makes sense to me as well. But I would say this. I think that you're right. Someone has been shot. There was an accident. Someone was run over. Hey, I think people need help. We might need an ambulance, right? I think all that, there's nothing to use there against you. Like, asking for the coroner. I was just being funny. But, okay, so what if something happens and someone else already called 911? If you know it, should you call or should you place that call anyway yourself? You know what I mean? Like, let's say there's a crowd, someone's probably already called 911, right? Do you make the call or do you just let them do it?
Me personally, I would not rely on the assumption that someone else made a call. Every time, I will tell you, I've called 911 when I've witnessed an accident. Every time I've called, the operator has said, 2 other people called and we already have, authorities on their way. If I was involved in a shooting, I'd want to make sure that I knew either firsthand that I made the call or I had, my buddy or a family member who was with me make that call so that I could say with complete certainty 911 was called. How do I know that? Well, I just called them 5 minutes ago, or my wife called them, or my friend called them. I would not want to make an assumption because, if your assumption's wrong or someone else, it just, to me, I think I'd want to make. Now, I've seen advice to the effect that it's not in your interest to make the call. It's better if you have someone, if you're able, have someone else make the call so that you're not on tape. Maybe, there's a point to that. But again, if you follow those simple rules and don't see anything that's harmful to those themes, I don't think that it doesn't strike me that could hurt you in a self-defense scenario. But again, if you get talking, you start talking about details of what happened. You could unwittingly put yourself in a position where you're stuck trying to explain away something that you said, something that you left out. Not a good idea. But I don't think it's a bad idea if your wife is there and you're all shaken up, you're nervous, have her call 911. You've reported it promptly. Same thing if you were involved in a motor vehicle accident. I see no issue with that, but I also see no issue if you have to make that call, so long as you're very brief and you don't make any detailed statements, and you hang up because the call is recorded. I think I read somewhere someone kept the open phone line, and that you're basically giving a window into everything that has happening, your conversation. Yeah. And so you need to get authorities there, and that's it. And then you can focus on.
Generically state what happened, right? Hey, there was a shooting, this location, right?
Yeah.
If you give a description of your clothes to the 911, do you think the police are going to get that?
That's a good question. I don't know, but I would assume yes. If you're if there aren't 15 911 calls and they haven't already dispatched, I don't see that. The other thing I'll say, John, is that the other piece of advice that actually a law enforcement friend gave me is obviously you don't want to have any weapon visible.
Right.
When the police arrive, because I would be nervous. They're dispatched to a shooting. I would imagine they're going to come in, ready, for anything. And I would be a little bit concerned about I would certainly make sure that there's no visible weapon, hands up, making sure you identify yourself to the officers so that you don't put yourself in harm's way when the police are up.
Yeah, I always tell guys, let's just say you shot somebody, but they're not dead, and the situation isn't secure. Stay ready, have your gun out till the police come, and before they even, they park their cars, right, and they're starting to close on you, set your gun down, raise your hands, back away from the gun, you know what I mean? Because you don't know what you're going to get with those guys, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's good advice. Advice.
I would also say this. Look, I don't think it's if you thought about making this 911 call and you knew how to do it, I wouldn't punt that to your wife.
Mm-hmm.
I would want to make the 911 call. No, I got it. Take a couple deep breaths, clear your head. What are you going to say? There's a shooting, this location, send police, send ambulance, hang up, move on, right?
I think that's totally legit. And I'll tell you, the other concern is your wife might, not have gotten a memo about no detailed statements as well, and she might, run or your colleague or friend. So I think, there's no necessarily right or wrong. There's maybe a best practice. I think that's a good suggestion that, but again, the only flip side is it's your voice that's recorded. But look, you have to make a call, right? Someone's got to make a call. So there's no absolute perfect, one way to do it. There are probably many bad ways to do it. But I think if you stayed on that path, whether it's you or even someone else, but I think that's sound. I think that's sound to take it under take control of it, and in some respects you minimize any potential fallout too. And,
think about this: if you had your wife or friend or someone you're with make the call, they're going to have to go to court and say they made the call, right? If you made the call, right, they can be kind of hands off and out of the thing. I think it'd be smart look, if you're going to carry a gun, you should be rehearsing these phone calls. You know what I mean? And remember what to say and say it appropriately. That way, look, the whole premise of this podcast was people who own guns never being in trouble with the law have no idea how the law actually works. And, we're not, I think through this whole conversation, we're not telling anyone to break the law, but what we're saying is, set yourself up for success. So later on, right, you have a better chance of being successful than, the opposite when you were just trying to do the right thing the whole time.
Absolutely. You can't let your guard down even after you're safe from a, self-defense account.
Yeah, completely agree. Well, awesome, man. I think that's a good place to wrap this up. I appreciate the legal advice. I think it's a great conversation. I think there's a lot of little details in here that may be something that a guy hasn't thought about before. You know what I mean? Like, I gotta be honest, I never even thought about placing a 911 call or how to do it, let alone having to do it. You know what I mean? So the fact of the matter is knowing what I know now, I'm making the 911 call. And, it's that simple.
Yeah, and you know what? Everyone can arrive at their own plan. There's a lot of good resources available. There are a lot of articles. I just talked about some general information that I've distilled from plowing through these articles, and you see the same themes. And look, there isn't necessarily one thing and only one thing that someone can say that's going to work. But knowing what not to say, knowing that the detailed statements are not in your interest, that's the name of the game. Increasing your awareness so that you don't hurt yourself with a in the legal context.
Yeah, I say this all the time. Like, you want to survive a war, if you learn the do not do stuff first, how you actually do stuff, as long as you don't do the do not do's, you'll probably be fine. If you only did one do not do, you might be fine. You could get away with two do not do's, right? But what you don't want is those, hitting multiple, like, do not do that. Oh, you did it again. Do not do this. You did it again. I think, not making those mistakes would leave you better off, or only making one mistake versus 5 or whatever, right? Like,
I agree completely. To in my view, when you're trying to be successful legally, you eliminate issues. You eliminate hurdles for you to overcome. The more issues, the more hurdles, the more difficult it's going to be for you to establish that, self-defense.
Right.
Yeah,
completely agree.
So,
completely agree. Okay, let's see. I'll give you the final word before we wrap this up. We've talked, about the whole thing, everything we see on the news every day, the protesters shooting somebody, it's starting to happen more and more. And the whole premise was, how do you set yourself up for a better outcome, especially if you don't know anything about the law, meaning you've been a law-abiding citizen your whole life. So what do you like to say to kind of wrap things up for everybody?
Final words would be, become familiar with the common themes of self-defense, especially if you're a concealed carry holder. Think about the things that, are consistent with that theme. So you put yourself in a position where, A, you exercise justified self-defense, and B, you're successful in proving that. But as we discussed, even if you do everything right, you're still in for a very dicey process. This could be, 4 to 5 years of your life trying to prove you're right, both in the criminal and civil context. So I think it's important for you to ask yourself, before you put yourself in harm's way, whether it's, attending a protest or putting yourself in a position where things could get messy, to ask yourself if you need to be there, you need to go down that road, and that's it.
Yeah, I tell guys all the time, gain distance, de-escalate, right? Like, these are sound advice for, I know it's generic, but if you did those things, you'd probably be better off. I say stay calm enough for long enough to make a better decision, right? And then ask yourself, is whatever's happening right now a death sentence for the other person? If no, this is a walk away or this is a getaway. You know what I mean? If yes, well, then maybe it's justified, right? So, I always tell guys, ask themselves those questions, you know what I mean? And, I think if you did those things, you'd be better off long.
I think that's completely consistent with everything I know about the law of self-defense. And the way I look at, every day there seems to be another news story about another incident. Here's my question. I always think about it. Do you think that person would have done things differently if he had the chance? And to me, a lot can be learned if you ask that question.
I completely agree. I completely agree.
Yeah. And I think that'll informs me about whether or not I think that's a good case for self-defense versus not a good case for self-defense. If you can answer that, you had no choice, you would have done the same thing. Then I think, you're probably looking at, a legitimate use of deadly force. If you look at that situation and say, boy, if I had that back, I would not have done that. Then I think, the opposite would.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it. Great talk. And we'll definitely have to do this again. Thank you.
John, I hope I didn't over-lawyer you, but it was a pleasure on my end.
No. Hey, I think I told you, there's several nuggets of information in here that I think guys are going to love.
Well, it was great